Okay. Panel, one thing that must be taken into cognizance, which we believe is very key in this debate, is the fact that states will be in the best positions, is the effect on the states. What happens when international organizations are the ones who have this right exclusively in their purview? We tell you that what will happen mainly is that in the state would not be able to combat as much as it ought to extremism in its own territory and in its own locale. Because what happens is that the state cannot, labeling any group extremist helps a state or helps an organization to combat that form of extremism it has identified. So when the state does not have this ability to call out extremist groups within its own territory, it limits the ability of the state to function and to engage extremism as it obtains in its territory. But what is very important to understand is the motion mentions groups such as Jehovah's Witnesses, to show that these groups are not such that are extremists to the extent that they kill and maim people, right? But these are groups which have mainly influence on the minds and perceptions of the people, right? And it affects them in this regard. So why is this very relevant in this debate? Because the state understands the nature and tactics of these things. So while these groups in the state within that territory might not appear to be extremists because they do not adhere to these international principles of armament, a weaponized extremist group. But the state understands that such groups are detrimentally influential on the values and the minds of its people. Therefore, it is the best capacity to act. But then let us address what Howard talks about oppression which might occur and how states might cause the suppression of such groups it deems any group shall just cause extremists. We tell you that since those groups are religious in nature and such that have influence on the minds of people, it places a burden on the state. The burden on the state is to ensure that it can provide evidence or proof to the people that these groups are actually extremist in character. Why is this relevant? Because people will not accept a characterization of extremists of groups like Jehovah's Witnesses who do not arm themselves as people will not accept the characterization of groups like Jehovah's Witnesses ordinarily, right? Unless you provide proof, sort of, that these people are negatively influencing the mind and perception and values of these people. And we tell you that it's only the state in that situation who can provide such, rather than an international organization whose main priority is not the minds and values of the state, but what influences it, but what appears to influence what those who appear to weaponize themselves and others. But going further, we will show you why. But going further, we'll be telling you on our first substantive matter that this limits the rights of states to self-determination. Why? Because states have the right and should have the right and duty to express its opinions about the ongoings, about certain things or certain narratives in its own territory. Why is this very relevant? Because without doing this, state is failing in its obligation to ensure that people in its society, in its obligation to ensure the well-being of people in the society, even if it's a mental well-being in this instance. But even going further, why do states have legitimacy? Because states have proximity, right? So states, because of the proximity factor, I'll take you in a bit, David. So because of the proximity factor, states have access to first-hand information about the sort of extremism that affects their people directly. This is not something that AU has. This is not something that the UN has. But because of proximity, Russia can understand that the nature of Jehovah's Witness evangelism and proselytizing in its territory is negative and detrimental on the people. This is something the AU might not recognize because maybe Jehovah's Witnesses or whatever other group in its perception do not qualify as extremist group. But even more importantly, we tell you that when this is limited, when you limit this right and duty of the state to fulfill its own obligation, this is an obligation of the state. When you limit this, we tell you that it is an infringement of states' rights for which they have not provided any probable justification. Why should you infringe on state rights to this extent? But going further, David, I'll take you now.
Right. If states have absolute control over the norms or laws of their own locale, is it legitimate for them to legalize slavery, for example?
That's the thing. It is not. Panel, we come to you in this debate telling you about things that influence the minds of people, right? I do not see the correlation between this, but if we do, Abolari will take that up. But then the aspect of influence on the minds of people is most important, and we have proven to you how proximity gives access to the right information, gives the state access to the right information. But going further, we are going to tell you this very key in our second substantive matter, why international organizations are bad actors in this debate. Why? One is because of the nature of leadership of international organizations. So we have these people, we have these organizations which are usually headed by countries which have act as big brother figures, right? So what these people understand to be extremism might be ideologically different from what a state perceives to be extremism, right? And we could think it is very wrong, fundamentally wrong, for the state to keep mum and allow such big brothers identify what they identify a type of extremism that is antithetical to what the state holds there. But even going further, we tell you that the persons or the organizations that will be classified as extremists will be such that are affecting such big brother figures. So if for instance there is okay, let's say for instance, I can't come up with an analysis. Al-Qaeda, I'll take you in a bit. Let's say for instance Al-Qaeda affects just the United States and United Kingdom. It is very wrong to have such organizations which affect just a limited number of states as extremists, and then not allow states to go ahead and mention their own and have their own levels of extremism which will affect them directly. But then thirdly, and most importantly, I will tell you that how this reduces sympathy on the other actors in the state, that is groups deemed extremists, right? This reduces sympathy. So if because of ideological differences, the AU decides a group is extremist, right, when it actually has sound basis in the culture and identity of others, in a sound basis in the opinion of other nations, we tell that this will reduce sympathy that such groups ought to actually obtain. And this is very important when you consider the nature of leadership of international organizations and how they prioritize a lot of things over and above what a lot of other states prioritize, especially states who do not occupy that big brother status. But what have we told you this day? We told you about what government has to do, the kind of organizations, and why this is very relevant. That these organizations will influence the minds and the hearts and influence detrimentally. So it places a further incentive on government to prove this to the people one way or another. It places a further and that is because in the 21st century, people are always critical of government's policies and instructions, so it gives them a further right. But even going further, we talked about how states have the legitimacy because of proximity and the nature of international organizations and its relevance. Proudly of OO.